This, I think, is probably the most important session, not because it's the closing plenary, but it's the one that we all really need to be focusing on because it's about how Africa is going to make sure that it's participating in the long-term economic growth that so many different countries are pursuing right now. Many countries pursuing their own industrial policies. We look at the U.S. with its Inflation Reduction Act, which is spending hundreds of billions of dollars on investing in the U.S. economy. Europe, with its Global Gateway, is investing a lot of money in developing its own competitive green technologies and green economy. But what about Africa? And this is a really important part and an issue that we need to make sure that as we look at the rest of this century, that African countries are participating in that growth and they don't get left behind. We're joined by a wonderful, wonderful panel of people that many of you already know. And so I just want to quickly introduce our panel and we'll get right into some questions. So we're joined by His Excellency, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, the former Vice President of the Republic of Nigeria, and also the guardian of Timbuktu Africa Innovation Foundation. Rita Jo Lewis, the President and Chair of the U.S. Export-Import Bank. Dapo Otunla, the Chief Corporate Services Officer for IHS Nigeria. Lamia Mersuki, the Chief Operating Officer of Casablanca Finance City. And Yvonne Ike, the CEO for Africa at Bank of America. So if anybody knows the answers to these questions, it's these folks who we have right here. So I'm looking forward to a lively conversation. I've got questions for all of them, but I would encourage anyone on the panel, if you have something you'd like to add, just give me 2 fingers and I definitely will call on you, but I'll make sure we hear from all of you. We're going to start with Chair Lewis. The question is that by the end of the century, there will be 2.5 billion people living in some of the largest cities in the least developed countries in the world if we do not accelerate growth. How do you see investments in critical infrastructure through initiatives like the G7 Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, PGI, driving the creation of new African jobs?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for that opportunity, and really want to thank Flory, who also sits on EXIM's Advisory Council, providing us, along with so many others, with advice and counsel about how to really be not just present on the continent, but how to deliver results on the continent. And so you're absolutely right. We are able to be up here with such a distinguished panel that in each one of our different areas is doing what we can to accelerate that growth. Was very excited to be here this week alongside my United States government colleagues, because we were able to announce 3 historic deals that had never been done before at EXIM, or had been done on the continent, announcing that for the country of Angola, as we were there on Tuesday alongside President Lorenz and his cabinet, and also my signing with Minister Vera Davies, the Minister of Finance, 3 agreements. One for $907 million, which is a U.S.-Angola project to build 2 solar major facilities on the continent in Angola. A second one, $363 million, an Acro Bridge project that is going to be providing prefabricated modular bridges throughout Angola. And then another one for $42 million, a project with Gates Air, which is a project that we're doing whereby the country of Angola will be able to communicate with over 95% of the population. All 3 of those projects are major infrastructure projects. They definitely come through. We were very excited to be here with our colleagues at the White House, Amos Hochstein, who has been working and leading the PGI effort, which is the Partnership for Global Investment in Infrastructure, which is a collaborative effort by our U.S. government agencies to support sustainable, clean, resilient, and inclusive infrastructure projects. We believe that that is just a continuation of the work that we have done. We know that is not nearly enough, but it is such a major beginning. But the major beginning did not start with these projects. Exim Bank, the America's Export Credit Agency, which its mission is to support exports and support U.S. jobs and provide, whether it's loans, whether it's guarantees, whether it's insurance products, has been working on the continent since 1942. Now, we're only 90 years old. That happened in February in 1934. So for as long as almost we have been around, we have been working on the African continent in a whole host of areas, whether it's been infrastructure, aviation, transportation, you name it and the like, small business. We have been there and we will continue to be there. And I think it is going to be through projects that we just announced in collaboration with other partners who are right here in this room, other the banking institutions that are in this room, other ECAs that participated with us. We realize it's going to be the collaborative effort of all of our governments to be able to do this, because we know that one government, one agency, one private sector company cannot provide all that is going to be needed on the continent, but at Exim Bank, we're trying to do our share.
I really appreciate that. I'm going to come back to you a little bit, because I want to know, it's great to hear about the projects you've announced. I want to know also about the projects that you're excited about, what your pipeline is going to be looking like. So it's great to have something here and go ahead and say, announce, look what we've done, but you have the pipeline. So I'm going to give you a chance to think about that. Maybe someone can text you some responses too. But so sorry to surprise you a little bit. So Your Excellency, Professor Osinbajo, what do you see as some of Africa's global comparative advantages in the global economy over the coming decades? So I talked about all the things that the US and Europe are doing to try to promote their economies, China promoting its own economy. But where do you think Africa is going to really show the rest of the world, say, look at what we've got, and we're going to really accelerate?
Thank you very much. I think today, renewable energy is certainly an area of comparative advantage. We have 40% of renewable energy potential. We have critical minerals as well, almost another 40% of what the so-called transition minerals. And of course, we have by 2030, we'll have 40% of the young people of the world. So human resources as well. So I think that clearly there is a comparative advantage with renewable energy and transition minerals in particular. And also, I think to a certain extent, we are at a point where practically anything that we want to do is possible. And for that reason, I think it's a time when Africa is open to collaboration, open to partnerships of various kinds. And as we've heard, there are already quite a few of those going on. But just in terms of the advantages, those I think are the key areas. And I think that if we're looking for opportunities, one of the critical things that was agreed to at the Africa Climate Summit last year was a new paradigm for development in Africa, which is called climate positive growth, or carbon negative growth. And of course, the reason why this is intuitive is because we have practically everything that is required to make that work.
You've written a bit, and I'll come back to you on this, about how, and I really loved what you've written about the global financial architecture.
Yes.
And how it's not necessarily set up
Yes.
to ensure Africa's growth. And I've written quite a bit about this as well, where I'm quite critical of the global financial architecture. But I'm going to come back to you and let others comment on that as well, if you want to think about that. And I hate surprising everyone. And, we have questions prepared, but when you hear people speak, you know that there are issues that they know a lot about, and that I think we'd all benefit from hearing from. So we're going to turn to a bank, and so we're turning to Yvonne from Bank of America. So as the G20 economies invest heavily in their own manufacturing needs. What do you see as the best ways for the African economies to work with the G20 economies and to benefit from that growth?
Andrew, thank you very much. I'm going to start by recognizing that it's been astounding to me the extent to which the US leadership has put more action and more intention behind engaging with Africa. And demonstrating that what is good for Africa can be good for the US and can be good for the world. So I say that because we must actually acknowledge that. It's much larger than we've ever seen. And importantly, it speaks to collaboration. One of the most important ways forward is we need to continue to increase collaboration between the US and African economies, and frankly, the G20 countries. And what that means is, as Professor Oshibajo said earlier, we do have resources and we do have assets that we can bring to the table. The dynamic is shifting from us not having a clear plan as Africans and frankly begging more than we should, to now coming to the table with more solutions. So in that collaboration, we should see the ideal kind of examples would be where we develop more of the critical minerals on the ground, at least 25 to 50% of it on the ground, and we're developing what the G20 countries need. And in collaboration, we're getting more agreement up front about what is needed and the standard to meet them.
This is making sure that Africa itself is participating in the value chains, not just exporting the critical minerals that Professor was
and going into those relationships. I have to speak about finance as well. We need to make sure that we continue to improve the channels for finance in the economy. One of the things that the US has done really well is to, through DFC, through US-EXIM, and Prosper Africa, increase the extent to which there's insurance and guarantees for investment in Africa. This has the benefit of bringing the right kind of private sector investors into the region.
Can you speak a little bit to insurance and why that product is so important? I can, because I was at DFC.
So what insurance does, Andrew, what it does is this. It knocks on the head the discussion about perceived risk and actual risk. It just takes it off the table. Because by providing the right level of insurance by a trusted institution like DFC, and what DFC is doing is not just providing much more insurance for some of these deals in Africa, as is the US-EXIM, they're also empowering the local African DFIs, Africa Finance Corporation, Africa 50, AFDB, Afri-EXIM. These are institutions that largely have African money. So this collaboration partnership through finance as well, and what insurance does is, I'll use an example of a transaction that we did that thanks to DFC, actually happened at all. So with Gabon, we all know the debt, the challenge with the amount of debts that we have in the continent, and how we need to better manage for that debt. So we were able to do a debt for nature swap with Gabon, really with the help of DFC. Because what we did with that is swap out of the existing debt at a higher price, go into insured products that DFC produced, which reduced the funding, and importantly, attracted US Treasury seeking investors and a broader range of investors who were then looking at a different risk profile for that investment. And at the time we were structuring the deal, we structured in a political risk insurance feature to it. 2 weeks after the deal closed, Gabon had a coup. And the investors for that instrument were fine then, and they're fine now. And importantly, because of the partnership and the collaboration with the DFC and the Nature Conservancy, there is assurance that the funds that were saved from that transaction are going to go into true nature conservation. What we're also seeing is beyond that, there's more innovation with saying, okay, debt for nature swap, why not debt for impact? Why not debt for energy? Right. And we're seeing that evolution happening in the relationship that the US is having with Africa. The other thing that is very important that we must continue to do, and again, I see US playing an increasingly important role, is manufacturing in Africa will be led by SMEs. And again, there's so much around the US policy, and I'm speaking about the US because I'm in the US now, and I think, to be honest, from what I've seen, particularly in the last 2-3 years, and particularly these last 3 days, I dare to say that the US is now increasingly getting ahead of the curve amongst the G20 countries in terms of genuine effort to move the needle forward with and for Africa. Yeah. So with SMEs, strengthening that private sector, it really deserves a round of applause to the United States, to be honest. And I don't say this lightly. But the SMEs, seeing that strengthening of the private sector in key economies, focusing on women, focusing on the more deprived parts that is harder to fund and support, means that if we continue to do that, we will see more activity in terms of manufacturing. I want to stress something. We talked about...
I'm going to come back to SMEs in a little bit, because I know that His Excellency focuses quite a bit in his current role on working with SMEs as well, and have a discussion on that. But I'm going to go back to the insurance point. I'm going to use a little bit of moderator privilege and just try to hammer home why this is so important. One of the things that I noticed when I was the coordinator for Power Africa, when I was in Nigeria, there was a period when almost all the power projects that US and other investors were pursuing were stalled, in part because people were concerned about what was happening with the currency. And I was watching Chinese investments continue to move forward. And I asked someone, what's going on? Why are they able to do this? And someone pointed out that there was a Chinese insurance company called Sinosure that provides coverage for these types of risks for a lot of Chinese companies. And you just pay your 7% or whatever it is to Sinosure, and it's taken care of. When I got to ODI, I stumbled upon research that one of my colleagues was doing, looking at 10 years of the Belt and Road Initiative and the role that Sinosure played. It was absolute gold. And what it showed me was that through Sinosure, this insurance agency that the Chinese have, they have over a $1 trillion portfolio globally. That includes China. Their margin, their profit in 2022 was only $100 million out of $1 trillion, not $1 billion. It's because they were using this tool as a policy bank to really promote development. It's something that DFC and others can scale in a significant way. This insurance tool costs the US taxpayer very little amount of money. And if we can scale that in a major way, it's an opportunity for us to really scale investment. So I'm going to move over to Dapo for a moment. And Dapo, since we're talking about infrastructure, I just wanted to ask you your thoughts about the most important infrastructure investments that need to be made. You know the telecom and ICT space very well, but you can talk about that, but any other sectors that you think are particularly important?
Thank you very much, Andrew. I think just to give some background as to why infrastructure is critically important, and that need exists today more so in Africa. If you look at it, when you were talking earlier on, you mentioned the population growth size. I think it was in 2035 or 2050. As of 2016, there were 1.2 billion people in Africa. 2024, we're talking 1.5. And then we're looking at 2.5 billion, in 2050. So there's a growth rate of about 2.5% annually, right? You look at infrastructure, and whatever base figure you want to take today, roughly about a 3.5% growth rate. Demand far outstrips supply, okay? Estimated, I hear rough estimates for between 100, 170 billion needed on an annual basis for infrastructure in Africa. And I say this because that gap needs to be plugged. And I come from the perspective, because of the company I work with, IHS, where you see challenges, there are opportunities, right? The various sectors I'm going to talk about, the vast opportunities in each of them. So I'll start with power, right? grid connectivity exists, and I'm going to be using IHS for a number of the examples I will use because I'm familiar with it. We have 16,300 plus towers in Nigeria. We have at least one generator on each site, beside each tower. Now, you can imagine if there was grid connectivity on all these. Revenue to the private sector provider, or even if it was public sector, tax revenue to the government. Now, if you take the multiplier effect of those generators and you take it across Nigeria, there are millions of generators, diesel being bought, services being provided, the revenue is not making it into the government coffers. Vast opportunity in that space. You go into transportation. We have 1,500 trucks moving across the country every month, either carrying diesel across the country or equipment across the country. Again, that's just one company.
And what about even just regional transport, going across the superhighway that's proposed to go from Lagos to Abidjan? What will that do, do you think, to help increase investment across the region?
I think again, that will be phenomenal when it gets done. We're currently talking now about a Lagos-Calabar highway. If that infrastructure is developed, it makes transportation a lot easier. It gives opportunities for transportation hubs to develop along the way. So there's just significant room for economic growth. Once these projects take hold and are completed. Whether it's this, the rail system is another burgeoning opportunity. We have rail now moving across a number of cities in the country, and it's an effective and efficient way of transporting large numbers of people, large numbers of products and produce. Again, it takes the other effect of that is it takes a lot of vehicles off the road, carbon emissions. So there are a lot of means and ways in which there are opportunities for people to tap into growth opportunities on the continent. I'll talk about health infrastructure. People look at it as just hospitals, as opportunities for laboratories to develop, job creation. Also, ICT. I think we have about 3 or 4 unicorns that have come out of Nigeria today. The median age in Nigeria is 15.1. In Africa, it's 19. A horde of talent. Amal spoke at one of the panels, I think it was 2 days ago, and she's talking about the phenomenal things she's doing in terms of processing data. She employs 2,000 people in Nigeria. Right? Opportunities abound. There's a significant room for infrastructure development, a possibility to develop special economic zones. We're talking last night at dinner about innovation hubs. Okay. Again, in the ICT space, the Minister of Communications in Nigeria has set up a program where he's training 3 million youth with technical skills. There are a number of states that are piggybacking off that. So I think Lagos State is looking at 50,000. Again, it's an opportunity. You come in, set up training schools. I actually think John also employs a number of data analysts in Lagos.
So you're laying out a lot of needs and a lot of opportunities. I'm going to turn to Lamia for a second, because Casablanca Finance City is all about bringing finance and to bear for the African continent, and you've got entities like Africa 50 that are based in Casablanca. And so all of these needs, all of these opportunities require financing. And so I'm hoping that, if we think about how if multilateral development banks, export credit agencies, development finance institutions, local banks, they all make significantly more funding available for investment in Africa. And if they agree to take on more risk, which a lot of people are calling for them, or better terms of financing, what are the key challenges on the other side? What are the key challenges that you think need to be addressed with respect to the investment climate in many of the African countries? And what do African countries themselves need to do to attract more investment.
Thank you, Andy. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here, and I'd like to thank Florizel again and Biova for their kind invitation. Actually, there are several challenges that span from high level to very operational. First, political and macroeconomic instability that can create, unpredictable and risky environments for institutional investors, poor infrastructure, and the lack of accessibility for some countries, skill mismatch, and also a lack of appropriate talent pool, and last but not least, bureaucracy and red tape burden. Because, Africa presents...
Which is what we see all over the world. That's what everybody's complaints about.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yeah, but, in Africa, we are 54 countries, and at the same time, we present untapped potential, but it's a fragmented continent with diverse legal and regulatory frameworks, a lack of robust market data and intelligence, and so on. So doing business in Africa is not a walk in the park. And for me, in order to succeed, international investors should choose the right safe landing platform. The right hub that could enable access to Africa's opportunities. And this is where regional business and financial hubs come into play, as they can really streamline investors' critical path. So what can we do as Africans? I think that the African continent should have more financial centers, because there is a unique characteristic that a financial center offers. It's not only a network of banks or a network of insurance companies, but the whole, the synergy of a whole ecosystem of actors, banks, insurance companies, asset managers, service providers, regional headquarters of multinational corporations, and so on, that work in a holistic way. And it can really be a catalyst to accelerate the reforms. And so what we see is that financial centers can really set up the appropriate legal and regulatory framework for international investors. This is what we did in CFC.
And this has helped accelerate investment into Morocco.
Of course, we are proud to host the Africa 50 Fund and other international major players that have chosen Casablanca as a hub for Africa. But of course, we build on Morocco's assets, which are political and macroeconomic stability, air connectivity, and so on, but we have put in place a specific value proposition. Today, your CFC-based business can be 100% foreign-owned, 100% foreign-staffed, and operate both domestically and internationally. And last but not least, financial centers are also here to raise awareness about Africa's opportunity. We ourselves, we are promoting the whole continent because we are aware that if we take the economy separately, we don't beep on international radars. We really need to work together in a co-development and co-emergence approach.
Okay, great. So we've talked about the needs, the opportunities, the financing, what needs to happen. I want to get down to the brass tacks. It's really about jobs, isn't it? And I think that we all need to make sure as Africans themselves are participating in the global growth. So I'm going to turn to both, I'm going to turn first to you, Chair Lewis, and also back to Dapo, to talk about what you see as the greatest opportunities for new job and growth opportunities for Africa.
Well, first of all, I would be remiss if I didn't also address the question that she was talking about over here, one of our bankers, the customers, about SMEs.
Oh, good. All right. We'll shift to SMEs.
Well, no. This goes
directly. Silent about that.
It goes directly to jobs.
Yeah.
We all know in all of our economies, here in the United States and around the world, doesn't matter whether you're talking north, south, east, or west, SMEs, our small businesses, are the drivers of our of every one of our economies. There is not one country, one leader that I have spoken with in these last years that all automatically starts talking about, one, what you just said, job creation, but also around small business, and very pointedly around women entrepreneurship and underserved populations. But the thing that we see about our small businesses, we all know that access to capital, #1 inhibitor and the #1 challenge for them growing and expanding. And so when we have small businesses or businesses period that are worried about buyer non-payment, they want to enter new foreign markets and expand the sales in existing ones, we know they need help. And in needing that help, they want to have access to additional credit. They're looking for buyer financing. And so when you start talking about export credit insurance from our perspective, we want to make sure that the products that we have, which that is one of them, a major one for us, it allows and enables businesses to extend credit to buyers to protect against non-payment and then improve their cash flow. Because that is, we're trying to ensure that through all the products that we have, whether it's credit insurance or capital guarantees or term financing, we want our exporters and the foreign buyers who work with us who are looking for goods and U.S. goods and services is to move what we call from export curious to export serious. They can only be export serious when they understand that institutions like ourselves at XM and other government institutions, as well as those in the private sector who offer up opportunities for financing for small business or for those large companies' supply chains. And so we know that every announcement that comes out of XM has a major job component that we support. That goes directly to our...
Is that jobs in the U.S. or jobs in the country we're going?
Well, let's put it like this. No one wants you to come and talk about just the jobs in your country.
Right.
We have to talk about the jobs that is not only being supported in our country, which we work with the Department of Commerce, our leading our economic agency, who develops and runs from the Bureau of Economic Analysis the jobs calculator. But when we are entering into projects like we did with on the solar project, on the project around bridges, on the project we run around Gates Air and radio transmission, we definitely, in the analysis that we do, in the discussions that we have, are engaged in conversations, not just about the jobs in the United States that we support, but also the jobs in those countries that are going to be developed through those projects that largely will come, especially from those in the supply chain. And so that's why XM monitors very, very closely all of the projects through the entire life of any loan or product that we, especially our loan products that we may have. We want to ensure, especially when we're dealing with small businesses, that they have the kind of tools that they need in order to move forward and to feel that they have a partner not only in the U.S. government, and that is why we work very collaboratively with foreign governments when they are with their export credit agencies, with their other institutions that are there to help serve the population in those particular communities.
Great. Thanks. I just want to share something that I would frequently say back when I worked for government, and I still see this today, is one of the major distinctions that you see for when a U.S. company invests in Africa versus a Chinese company is that, and I gave the example of GE. When GE first came to the African continent, 95% of their staff were expats and the rest were local, but just within a few years that reversed, and it was 95% of their staff were local staff and very, very few expatriate. And that's because it's a good for business, it's part of the values of the US companies, but it also makes financial sense as well. So there's just a financial reason to that, and it's a major, major distinguishing factor. The other thing I want to point out is, and XM is an export credit agency, so when we talk about small businesses, often we're talking about how we're supporting US small businesses. I know you also support African small businesses in other ways. Distinguishing that with DFC, which is providing financing for overseas investments and has an opportunity to directly finance, or working through intermediaries to directly finance small African businesses and entrepreneurs as well. So the US government brings that full suite of products, which is great for job creation. I'd like to turn to Your Excellency to talk a little bit about your new work that you do, and with the Timbuktu Africa Innovation Foundation, and what you see as the opportunities in supporting small and medium enterprises in Africa.
Yeah, thank you. So the Africa Innovation Fund, called Timbuktu, is the largest single financing facility which combines catalytic funding and commercial funding to support the Africa innovation ecosystem, and is really the largest of its kind. It's a $1 billion fund. And now we have in 8 countries, we have hubs in 8 countries. These are innovation hubs that are verticals, sector specific. So in Lagos, Nigeria, we have the FinTech hub. In Kenya, a climate hub. In Kigali, health hub and all. So these are meant to be centers of excellence. And then in universities in some countries already, about 13 countries now, we have unipods, which are essentially hubs in the universities. Whole idea, of course, is to encourage innovation, create, spaces where collaboration can take place, financing can be looked at, and all that. And importantly, we also have we're developing a virtual hub. We don't have it yet, which would enable young people practically anywhere in the world to collaborate in, using the spaces that will be provided in this virtual hub to collaborate on, on different projects. And the hub, of course, we're hoping would use immersive technologies in order to facilitate these kinds of collaboration. So as far as as Timbuktu is concerned, we think that this is going to be significant in terms of providing opportunities and jobs for young people across Africa. And we think that the financing model is also important, namely that we're looking at a $350 million catalytic fund. And of course, we're looking to philanthropies, we're looking to the MDBs and, other such organizations to fund the catalytic part of the catalytic part of the fund. And then the commercial part will be $650 million. Obviously, the commercial will await the catalytic, and we'd like to see how far we can de-risk their adventures into the space. So we're working very hard with a good number of philanthropies. MDBs have shown quite some interest. And of course, there are great examples already of what innovation can do in Africa. And I think it was Dakwa who pointed out a moment ago that the fintech space, for example, in Nigeria, we have about 6 or 7 unicorns now, and this is within a space of about 7-8 years of their starting business. So it's evident that there's a lot of energy out there, there's a lot of talent, and what is lacking and what needs to happen is the right type of funding, and the blended sort of finance.
Yeah, blended finance is critical to making sure it's the right type of finance.
That would enable this to really take off and to happen. So we're all set to go.
Great.
And of course, there's a lot of hard work to go and plenty of miles to travel. But I think that we've started quite well.
Okay. Thank you. So I know we got diverted a little bit talking about SMEs because they are so important to job creation, but the theme is Africa's industrialization. So I'm going to turn back to Dapo and talk about the jobs in the big industries, the big manufacturing. Where do you see as the opportunities on a sector-wide basis for a significant number of jobs, on an industry-wide basis? Is it in the ICT industry? Like, where do you see those opportunities?
Thank you, Andrew. And I think it's actually a very interesting time for Africa because we're seeing integration across the continent. We're seeing regulatory harmonization. We're seeing financing that is adapting to the local situations on the ground. We're talking about SMEs and their accessibility for financing, at that level, which hasn't always been the case. So it really is a phenomenal time for job creation, because in the respective spaces that you look at, the different industry sectors, they're impacted by all these, I refer to them as catalysts for growth, job creation in these areas. So ICT is one. His Excellency spoke about, and I spoke about it earlier also, the unicorns coming out. FinTech, I spoke earlier about the median ages. These kids are doing really exciting stuff. The innovation hubs, we've built a few ourselves, through our company. And I like the idea that Timbuktu is coming up with in terms of on university campuses, because if you can sow the seeds there, they can only grow. So ICT is a huge space. Alternative energy is one. I think the grid might go the way the handsets went with the telephone system back in the day, where people stopped having telephone boxes in their homes. The grid is at risk of going that way too, because people, at least the grid as we knew it in the 70s and 80s, because with the way these countries have developed, we're going to be looking at alternative energy solutions, solar, mini grids.
But for that industry, so it's great to roll out that type of technology, but when all the panels are being made elsewhere in China and assembled elsewhere, where are the opportunities that are going to create tens of thousands of jobs at a time? Are they battery factories? Are they panel factories? Is it something having to do with data and ICT? Where is the big growth? Like, what's the big industry?
Andrew,
and anyone can answer this.
They're being made in China today. Watch Africa.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm asking you, though. But do you see anything in the next?
The opportunity is there.
Vehicle manufacturing.
We have assembly plants now, which we didn't have, a few years ago, and there are a lot more of them springing up across Africa. The advent of AI is also going to transform things significantly on the continent. And I think people have already started preparing themselves for that advent. What we're going to see, you talk about batteries. By the time you look at it, by the time services are being provided in Nigeria for the U.S., I was talking yesterday, I think for a number of years, and I don't know if it's still the case, traffic tickets in New York were being processed in Ghana. Just to take advantage of the time difference. A lot of insurance claims being processed in Ghana and now in Nigeria. We've overcome this myth or stereotype that was there. We're talking about avoiding the risk on the financing side. There's this other risk that's also being addressed and being addressed at a fast pace. So I think there's change coming. Yeah, there'll be industries that we can't even think of today that are going to really, really scale. I'm going to turn to back to Lamia for a moment, just to talk about going back to Casablanca Finance City, which has created a model for the rest of the continent. Can you share with us what other African countries are doing to develop and promote their own finance centers?
Well, I can talk about the financial centers that I know in Africa. Through the network. I mean, there is a network called the Financial Centers for Sustainability Network, which is the network of the world's green financial centers born out of the G7 presidency. It represents today over 80% of the global equity market, and it has an African chapter. And within this chapter, we have some countries which are part of the network. We have, of course, Lagos, Johannesburg, we have Nairobi, Kigali, Abidjan, and Cairo. Lagos is doing a great job in sustainability, and we are cooperating actually together. There is a strong collaboration between African financial centers, and this network, for instance, it has been a catalyst for the emergence of new financial center bodies, namely Abidjan Finance City. I mean, today we have signed a partnership agreement ourselves, Casa Finance City, with the Ministry of Economy and Finance to create Abidjan Finance City. And we are collaborating with many other financial centers.
Great, thank you. All right, Yvonne, I'm coming back to you because I cut you short when you're talking about SMEs. And if you want to talk about SMEs, you can. But I got a slightly different tack for you. I want to talk a little bit about the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act because we hear a lot about it. And for those of you who don't know about it, it's investing hundreds of billions of dollars in the U.S. economy right now to try to promote new green technologies, which will bring down the cost curve for people worldwide on a lot of technologies. So I guess my question to you is, while this type of industrial policy, as well as the European industrial policies and other industrial policies from other countries, will stand to provide benefits to domestic audiences where they're being implemented, how do you see Africa benefiting from these types of investments?
Thank you, Andrew. One important facet of the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act is it specifically targets domestic production of energy for a cleaner economy. And I think that element of it makes it one of the best things that could have happened to Africa in recent times. And I say this because we all know that over 600 million Africans are in darkness. So when we talk about industrialization and manufacturing and socio-economic transformation, none of that happens without an increase in energy. So it's a perfect time for us to be strengthening our collaboration with the U.S. because the U.S. can be innovating and producing more energy sources for domestic markets and for Africa markets. And importantly, we have a lot of the critical minerals, or the critical ingredients, I should say, that may be needed for some of that increased production. So there's a partnership that could be had there where we can supply minerals or resources at a later stage of development, because ideally we should be developing it more.
To be at a higher level within the supply chain, not just exporting the raw minerals,
exactly,
but doing at least some level of processing.
Yes. So I really think that the Inflation Reduction Act is one of the best things that could happen to help us improve energy supply in Africa. Okay. It needs us to also have mirroring policies so that we can take advantage of this. We're not there yet. We need to get there. And of course, I have to keep on talking about the increased scale of financing that is needed for that to happen. But it's definitely a win-win.
Okay, thanks. So we have about just 4 minutes left. I know that Chair Lewis wants to say something. I was going to either go to you, but I figure I could just go to everybody quickly, go down the row and give everybody a minute, and you have a different response of what you want to talk about. Because the question to everyone is, what would you like to see the U.S. do to help accelerate Africa's industrialization in a minute? But Chair Lewis is going to have her own views on this also. Do you want me to start with you, Chair Lewis, or go down the row? All right, start with Dapo.
All right, thank you. I think
in a minute or less, if you can.
Less than a minute.
Okay.
Increased partnership. And I see a lot of the U.S. government agencies increasingly on the ground, particularly in Nigeria, where that's where I'm based. So we see that, and I think there's been I see more on the service provision side. A lot of Nigerians, Africans, working with the USGA, first generation, second generation Americans, coming down because they have an understanding of what the issues are on the ground. So it really facilitates the communication and dialogue that needs to occur, and I think it's a really positive step.
Thank you. Yvonne, over to you.
My big ask would be that the U.S. lead an initiative to work with us Africans to persuade very strongly the G7 or G20 countries, but G7, let me start with there, to divert more of the funding that they have available, whether it's for climate, sustainability, energy, call it what you want. Divert it into more insurance for Africa.
More insurance?
Yes, more insurance to
I thought you were looking over my shoulder at the proposal that I was writing up before we started this panel. We should talk after.
Because we know that if some people say it's 4 times leverage effect. I think it could be even up to 10 times leverage effect.
Excellent. Thank you. Your Excellency.
Yes. So the AGOA, the Africa Growth and Growth Opportunities Initiative, is the reauthorization, I think, is taking place right now. And what I'd like to see is the expansion of AGOA's coverage to critical minerals from several parts of Africa. I mean, there's so many now that can then be integrated into the clean energy supply chain. I think that one of the things that we're lacking at the moment is really the opportunity to be integrated into the clean energy supply chain.
I love this.
So the minerals are there already, you know, and then I think that AGOA will be a perfect opportunity. And then along the lines of the mineral treaties or the mineral agreement signed with Japan, a similar treaty flowing out of AGOA can be signed with African countries, especially those countries that have critical minerals and rare earth metals as well.
I love that, and we didn't get to our AGOA question, so that was perfect that you brought that up. So over to you, Chairman Lewis.
No, I just think that when you start talking about IRA and how we can accelerate Africa's industrialization, I think it's going to happen the same way that America is accelerating ours. And one of the things that President Biden asked all of us to do once he took office was to use whatever tools to investigate, to see what tools that we have inside of our own institutions that could complement the work that's going to be being done along the IRA. And we actually developed an initiative called Make More in America. We know that we need to make more, but we also in America, but we know we need to export more from America. We realize that the consumer marketplace is 95% outside of U.S. Shores, and so with us and an initiative like that, it allows us on the first time to provide our tools and loans and other financing products that we have to advance and support the expansion of domestic manufacturing as long as there is an export nexus, as long as we are additional to the transaction, as long as there is a reasonable assurance of repayment with the ones that we would be entering into transactions with. And we've been fortunate that we have authorized 3 of those types of projects so, going forth, and each one of them have a major sustainability portion to the work that they're doing. I would tell you that as EXIM strives to continue to be the bank for everybody, not just the bank for a few, I still think it comes back down to small business. And so we are proud that of the $8.87 billion we authorized last year, $2 billion of that was in small business. So when you keep asking the question about where is the growth is going to be in small business. The growth is going to be working in countries who with our companies and clients who are working those big projects but have very large supply chains. And those supply chains are not just going to be about those in the U.S. It's going to be about those who are creating doing the work in country, and that's where jobs are also going to be created. And so we're really excited to do our part. And I agree with our panelists. It's going to be through partnerships. It's going to be through collaborations. And being here at an organization 16th meeting says to us that these are all the right people in the room for us to continue to be working with, and we're excited about doing that going forward.
Thank you so much, Chair Lewis. Lamia.
The continent mindset is actually shifting away from aid to trade and investment. So I think first that Africa must trust Africa so that the US trusts Africa more, one. Then in this context, I think the US could be instrumental in 3 things, providing FDIs, providing cutting-edge technologies, and also capacity building. For instance, in some regional projects like the gas pipeline between Nigeria and Morocco, we had the opportunity here to speak with some investors based in Dallas, and there has been a strong interest in investing in those kind of projects which are instrumental for Africa, for regional integration, for the AFCA, the Africa Free Trade Continental Area. So I think that there is so many things to do with the US.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks to this wonderful panel. I always love a panel when I've learned something new and it gives me new ideas. So I'm looking forward to following up with several of you to figure out how I could help you advance your ideas. Thank you to CCA for putting on a fantastic week. Thank you to Flory, to Biova, everyone who's participated in helping creating such rich content throughout the week. And thanks to all of you for participating.